Albany, Longway, Rangitoto. You can see the actual enrolment schemes for those primary schools, and this is one of the areas we've done quite a lot of work in. Albany School has an enrolment scheme, it's that black outline. And the issue here was that Albany is a metropolitan centre in the unitary plan. It's got a really large enrolment scheme that was designed for it when it was a village, and it's not going to be a village anymore. So, so one of our options here was that we wanted to amend the enrolment scheme and make it smaller. We did. We had an enormous fight. Well, a lot of a section of the community in the we amended it and we brought it up to, I can't remember what the name of that main road is, but we basically reduced the enrolment scheme at the bottom southern corner there, and it all got in the media, and communities and households got very upset. But essentially, if we don't make that change, that amendment, Albany School is going to be full and overfull, and in fact they've had children in their classroom. So not a pretty situation. So we're actually in Albany, we're doing three things. We are looking for a site for a new primary school, we're adding more capacity to the existing primary school, and we reduce the enrolment scheme. So the growth there was so strong that we had to do all three things that we had open to us. So this is from our, we have this really big Excel model, catchment planning model, growth model. It's got all the historical data in it. So you can see the figures there from 2013 to 2018. So those are actual roles going across. And then if we move across to the right, we can see the out of zone numbers. We can see whether we've got a deficit or not. We now project out to 2023, 2030, and right out to 2043. We can also track, so you've got some total numbers at the bottom of the network, and you can see that Albany network is going to be at 103% utilised by 2019, and it's going to stay that way, which is what told us we needed probably a new school. So this is the Mount Albert, Mount Roskill, Linfield catchment, and the major growth area here is Mount Roskill. So the key player in Mount Roskill is Kaina Ora, so the public sector development, and they are planning to build, they're going to demolish about 2,000 houses, and they're going to build, I think, 10,500 dwellings. So that's massive, that's huge, it's a big regeneration project. What they've done is to divide Mount Roskill up into, Mount Roskill is the precinct, then they divide it all up into neighbourhoods, and they're able to share with us all the yields and staging across those neighbourhoods. So we know that, for example, the Mount Roskill South neighbourhood is one of their first stages, and that's going to directly affect our May Road School. So we've been able to do some demand analysis. What they do, their mode of operation is to demolish one house and put 3, 4 or 5 in its place, or one dwelling. So my understanding is that their model is 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. So they will rebuild 1/3 public housing, 1/3 affordable, and 1/3 market housing. So massive uplift in Mount Roskill, and this has an enormous effect on our schools in Mount Roskill. So the precincts that are going ahead at the moment, so that Roskill South May Road precinct, Owaraka, and the planning is being done for Wesley at the moment. We've got 3 schools on a big campus at Mount Roskill, primary, intermediate, and secondary. But the other thing that we have to be careful of, so if we've got lots of schools in Mount Roskill, and if you divide the growth from 7,500 houses across the whole precinct, it all fits. But actually, Kaina Ora are intensifying. They're putting 5,000 of those houses, 5,000 to 10,000 are all in Wesley. So that gives us a bit of a problem. We've got one tiny little primary school sitting there at Wesley Primary, and a very small intermediate school, but the concentration of the houses, the intensification is going to sit through that Wesley area. So sorry I can't give you a better map of that, but hopefully you've got a picture of it. So we will have to work out, do we need another primary school in Wesley? How do we distribute the students? Can we use enrolment schemes to maybe distribute them slightly differently? So at the moment, we'd be planning from taking Wesley Primary from a couple of hundred students up to sort of 900 master plan, the same for Owaraka, the same for Mount Roskill Primary. And then we've got 3 intermediate schools in that network. So we'd be trying to sort of distribute the students across with enrolment schemes. So that's really interesting suburb at the moment. We can also talk about Tamaki. So the next 2 slides are focusing on Tamaki. So this is another really big regeneration area. So Tamaki Regeneration Company are active. And I thought it was just quite interesting to show those walkable ped sheds in Tamaki. So those are, we've just applied a walking catchment, and you can see, because obviously for a primary school, they've got quite a small catchment that they draw students from, because they're 5 to 11-year-olds. So you want them to be able to walk. So if we're looking at enrolment schemes for a Primary school will use those walking catchments. We'll look at them. We don't want kids crossing major roads. So this would inform where we draw in enrolment schemes. So we've got exactly the same thing in these suburbs through Glen Innes, Point England, Tamaki, Panmure, is we've got TRC and Kainaora doing the same thing. We've got another 10,000 houses going in Tamaki. We've worked out that here we've got enough schools. We just need to build them 3 or 4 times bigger than they are at the moment. And we're just going through putting enrolment schemes, or we will be next year probably. So slide 23 is just showing you, if we just use those ped sheds, where would we draw our enrolment schemes? So we've got other options here where we've got sort of overlaps and things, but this is kind of our default option for drawing enrolment schemes. The college doesn't have an enrolment scheme, but that's quite straightforward. We just draw one for the unzoned area. So it's really interesting. We've got a really strong group of schools that we're working with here. They've got something called the Manaiakalani Trust, which is looking at digital learning across all of those schools and sort of pedagogy for accelerating learning. So all of our work, we work really closely with the schools. So we're really looking here at how do we support these schools. We've got a whole new demographic. We've got a big population change coming right through this whole area, and maybe they need to change some of the ways that they're operating their learning and curriculum. And we expect massively higher numbers of students in the future. I guess the other thing to say here, we've got the same problem as we've got in Mount Ruskell, we've got here. So Kainaora, the pink area there, which is the enrolment scheme for Point England School, that's where the intensity of housing is going to go. So again, out of the 10,000 houses, 5,000 of them are all going to go in that sort of pink and blue area in the middle. And that gives us a real massive problem, because Point England Primary School is the biggest school there already. So we haven't got much of a chance of adding. That school would have to be 2,000 students big, and we don't want to do that for a primary school. The other debate we're having across the Ministry of Education is traditional style schools, 2-storey schools versus compact urban schools. We haven't got any really good examples of urban schools in the way that they've got internationally. So for example, we've identified a need for a CBD primary school, and we're looking at, well, what would that look like? Would that be a leased building somewhere? Would we build a 5 or 6-storey school?
So we've seen examples of that overseas. So we've got an idea of what works and what doesn't and where we need to head with it. The sticking point is it's a huge step up in terms of cost over a regular school that we're used to building. So if you're in an urban environment, obviously it's got to have a small footprint. And what we see over the Tasman in Australia is that you might build in a tower, or you might probably not lease a building. They found that problematic because other tenants don't like sharing a building with schools. And if they do, you have to have separate entrances to keep the children separate from the commercial people in the building. And then, of course, if you need to grow your school, how do you do that? Do you lease another floor off somebody? And what if it's not next to one of the floors you've already got? So there's all sorts of interesting stuff going on. And the advice we had from over the ditch was that if you can, you need to own the building. So you can set it up to be exactly what you need it to be for a school. You might be able to lease out the surplus to someone else if you can, have a separate entrance. But the biggest thing is cost. So if we were to lease or buy a building in the CBD, it's so much more expensive than a regular build that it raises eyebrows. It has to go, right the way up to the top for approval. And in reality, it eats up so much of the annual budget for new schools that people say, well, if I could spend that much on 3 or 4 other schools and feel like that was better value. So it's a difficult one to sell. It doesn't help that you have to be really quick to pick up a building for a school. So we've seen some opportunities come up as possibilities, and bureaucracy doesn't move quite as quickly as commerce. And so by the time we may have worked out whether it's a goer or not, you kind of missed the boat.
We're starting to get some more sort of standardised designs for schools across New Zealand. They tend to be, so we've got some typologies for 2-storey primary schools. We've got typologies for 3 or 4-storey secondary schools. What we haven't got is a standard design for compact urban school of the type Nick's talking about. So, that's sort of 4, 5 and 6-storey schools. So we've got all sorts of design guidelines that go with new schools around air quality and lighting and all of those things. So as reference like building designs. And we also try and have 20 to 30 square metres green space per child. That's outdoor space, outdoor usable space. And there's a big debate around that. So if you had a compact urban school, you might not be able to meet that 20 square metres requirement per child. Right, so Drury. There's a big sort of multi-agency effort, I guess, with Drury. For us, we looked at it, so I think we're going to have up to 23,000 more houses in Drury, which is a new population of about 60 to 70,000 more people over the next 20 years. We've got one little tiny Drury primary school, which is basically a rural primary school at the moment. We've got secondary schools, Rosehill College and Papakura High School, but not much actually in Drury. So this is kind of a greenfield, sort of start with a blank piece of paper situation. So we tried to think about it as the whole of Drury and the 23,000 houses, and that proved quite difficult. So what we're doing now conceptually, we're thinking about Drury West and Drury East, because we've got a great big motorway down the middle, and also a train line, so it kind of causes difference. So we're looking at, so we've bought sites for a new primary and secondary school in Drury West, because that was the first stage that was starting. We are likely to need between 6 and 8 primary schools overall in Drury, and potentially 2 new secondary schools. So we know that, the numbers tell us that. The problem is, when do you do that? So it's not like building a shopping centre where you can just come in and compete with your competition. If we put new secondary schools in here too early, we'll undermine the existing secondary schools. So you can get this kind of hollowing out effect where families decide to send their children to the new bright shiny thing, and they sort of all leave one school and they all navigate to the next one. So whenever we put a school in, we always put an enrolment scheme around it so that we try and stop that happening. So this is, so I understand that there's probably plan changes just going through at the moment. So we've got a couple of key players operating here: Kiwi Property, Oyster Capital and Fulton Hogan, and there's some proposed zoning. So this was Future Urban Zone, and they're just wanting to, if you look at the Future Urban Land Supply Strategy, this area is not signalled to develop until about 2028, but we've got a number of developers wanting to bring development forward. So from our point of view, we could end up with development going ahead in Drury West at the same time as Drury East. The starting point here is probably about over 6,000 houses. We would need 3 primary schools, and if we add in Drury South below Stevenson's, we'd need a double secondary school as well. So we're just about to start all our network assessments, all our demand planning for Drury, and go and have a talk with some of these developers. The other thing that caused there was a lot of debate about was where the new train station was going to go. So I think this will be another really interesting case study, just to see what actually gets built, because in theory this is a whole new town, and potentially we might see a new certainly health infrastructure coming in here in a staged way, maybe an integrated health hub, maybe a hospital at some point, and quite a few new schools. Just to talk about enrolment schemes, we've touched on those already. What you can see here, this is basically all the enrolment schemes in the region for primary schools, and you can see that basically the majority of our schools in Auckland have enrolment schemes. You can see some areas of yellow at the edge. Some of our rural schools don't have enrolment schemes, but most of the ones in the urban areas do. So we make quite a distinction between rural and urban. Those schools tend to operate quite differently, and the rural schools have much bigger catchments. This was an example back in Northcote. So because we identified that growth in the Northcote Centre, this was one of the areas that didn't have enrolment schemes in place. So we've had a sort of collaborative project with the 3 intermediate schools in Northcote. There's 4 or 5, because I think Northcote Intermediate already had a scheme, and then we've put schemes in place for Birkdale, Glenfield and Warra Valley. So we're gradually going around the region, just making sure that every single school has an enrolment scheme. So I think if you ask me in 5 or 6 years' time, they'll probably all have a scheme. It's causing us a few. People can get very emotional about which school their child goes to. So as soon as we try and amend enrolment schemes, people tend to get a little bit upset. But we've just got to push through.